Taco Ingoa. Diversity means the state of being different, and I will be telling you about diversity in the cultures in China. Imagine if China was not diverse. Everybody would wear the same clothes, eat the same food, play the same sport, and speak the same language. That would make a huge difference from what China is now. China has 56 cultures, and each one of them is as unique as the other. The main cultures I will talk about are the Han, the Zhuang, the Mongols, and the Tibetans. The largest cultural group is Han. There are 900 million people in the group. That makes it 94% of the whole popularity in China. It is also the world's largest ethnic group, with 18% of all people on earth being Han. I am Han, and I think that most Chinese people here are Han too. Han people speak Chinese, but most minorities speak other languages, falling into 15 different languages in China. Zhuang is another cultural group in China. It covers about 3.24% of the whole population. Most of the Zhuang people speak Mandarin Chinese. They mostly live in a place called Guangxi. Guangxi is a pretty big place, considering that it is 237,600 square kilometers. They like to wear complicated clothes like headwear and jewelry. Then there is the Mongol culture. It covers about 5.98% of the whole population. They live in big tents and they normally eat sheep, cows, chicken, and more. They like to practice archery and they like to ride on horses that they train and keep. They normally also wear complicated clothes and headwear, just like the Zhuang people, but their ones dangle from their hair. Lastly, there is the Tibetan culture. It covers 0.47% of the China population. Tibet is known as the roof of the world or the land of snows. This is because of its beautiful scenery. When it snows, it becomes a beautiful winter wonderland. Tibet became fully independent in the 14th centuries because the Yuan dynasty and the Mongol Empire took control over Tibet. Tibet is famous for its high mountains and sacred lakes, and is definitely a great place to visit. The Tibetan people wear nice and furry clothes to keep them warm during the winter. China has a lot more cultures, but the ones that I mentioned are only a tiny fraction of how many cultures there are in China. If you ever want to visit a beautiful place with different food, cheerful streets, or different cultures, you should visit China. It is definitely a great place.
Sri Lanka, also known as the Pearl of the Indian Ocean, is a small country but a beautiful island. The capital of Sri Lanka is Sri Jayawardenepura. The business hub is Colombo. There are 9 provinces and 25 districts in Sri Lanka. The president is Gotabaya Rajapaksa and the prime minister is Mahinda Rajapaksa. The national flower is the blue water lily. The national tree is Na tree. The national animal is a jungle flower and the national game is volleyball. There are waterfalls, rivers and jungles. There are many ancient and historic places in my country. Sri Lanka is one of the few countries with very vast and rich culture diversity. The culture is itself unique and thereby contributes to the Sri Lankan identity. Sri Lankan culture includes a lot of customs and rituals which date to more than 2,000 years, which were handed down from generation to generation. The most prominent feature of Sri Lanka is the colorful festivals, which is one of the main tourist attractions. Religion plays an important role in the molding of the Sri Lankan culture. Sri Lankan culture is often reflected by the use of art, architecture, sculptures, and even food. Some people would say that Sri Lanka is more conventional culture which is obviously influenced by the prominent religions prevailing in the country of such as Buddhism, Hinduism, and Islam and Tamil. For example, the Sri Lankan way of life is very simple and filled with humility and happiness. This is one of the reasons why Sri Lanka has very great sense is in appreciating the simple things such as life as nature. One of the main features of the culture is its European and Indian influence. Since most of the time Sri Lankan married Indian princesses, they have incorporated in Indian culture into our but still preserve the unique Sri Lankan identity. The European influence was a result of invasion from the Dutch and Portuguese. And finally, the British hospitality is also one of the prominent characteristics of the culture, making Sri Lanka one of the friendliest nations in the world. I have had an opportunity to go to Sri Lanka, and you can too. Just try to go to Sri Lanka and have a great experience. If you did go to Sri Lanka for the past 2 years, you can tell me all about it. I'm saying 2 years because there has been a virus, and that's why we couldn't travel. Thank you.
Kia ora. Ko Elijah Tucker Ingoa. Racism, protest, apartheid, rugby. In 1981, the South African rugby team, the Springboks, came to play rugby in New Zealand. But because of racism in South Africa, there were big problems like riots and protests when they came to play. Diversity was the reason behind the massive riots and demonstrations that occurred during the tour. Diversity is what makes each of us unique and includes our racial backgrounds, personalities, and beliefs. All of the things that make us who we are. The South Africans didn't value racial diversity. The Springbok tour lasted for 56 days across July, August, and September 1981 and caused New Zealanders to be divided against each other. They were divided because the legal status of citizens in South Africa was determined by their race. This was an era known as apartheid, and it was how South African society was organized from 1948 until 1991. Basically, it meant that if you were white, then you had better rules. If you were black or colored, for example, black and colored people had to go to worse schools, supermarkets, movie theaters, and they could not play a sport in the same team as white people. It was a poor and horrible life if you were not white in South Africa at this time. But in New Zealand, Pakeha and Māori and Pacific people, as well as people from other parts of the world, were treated as equals under the law. The opposite of South Africa. The riots happened because New Zealanders did not agree with apartheid and didn't think the rugby tour should go ahead because there were no black or coloured people allowed to play for South Africa. More than 1,500 people took part in over 200 demonstrations. No people died, but some people got injured. The games were constantly interrupted by protests in Hamilton. The Springboks were in the changing rooms freaking out as protesters were invading the field and threatening to the players. At Eden Park in Auckland, a plane dropped bags of flour on the rugby field trying to get the game cancelled, with one falling on the head of an All Black called Gary Knight. The protests even affected schools. Some rugby fields were vandalized with broken glass and circular saw blades as well as graffiti. This tour affected New Zealand so strongly because of the different racial beliefs between countries. I think that South African tour should not have gone ahead because they separated people based on their race, and that's not right. One good thing that happened was that 13 years later, 1994, apartheid was cancelled and the race-based policies of South Africa disappeared with the election of Nelson Mandela, who united the country as one people. We now play rugby with South African without protesters or riots.